Corresponding parts of congruent figures. But first, let's just practice some of the skills. So, there is an error in finding the measure of angle 1. Identify the error and then correctly find the measure of angle 1. So, looking at number 1, what is the error that they made? Helena?
It should equal 180, not 26.
Yeah, triangles add to 180, so they should have done 115 plus 39 plus the measure of angle 1 equals 180. Nope, it's 16, isn't it? Is that right?
26.
It was 26?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, I was right the first time. All right, who can look at the next one and tell me what the error is here? What is the error there? Yes, Logan.
What did you have to do? 80 plus 50 equal to angle?
Yep. So it's actually 80 plus 50 equals the measure of angle 1. That's the exterior angle theorem. So that is 130 equals the measure of angle 1. So a little recap before your quiz, because this theorem will be on your quiz, and so will the fact that triangles add to 180 on top of some of that stuff we just went over. Do we have questions on either of those things? Besides Jill, was anybody else absent Friday? Okay, so Jill, again, you just won't take your quiz today, because you kind of need that time to figure out what we learned on Friday. Okay, so corresponding parts of congruent triangles are congruent, and that's called Cpctc, so you don't have to write corresponding parts of congruent triangles are congruent 1,000 times. So, we know that triangle ABC is congruent to triangle DEF. Do you see how this is color-coded? So, whatever letters line up in the triangle, those angles are the ones that are congruent to each other. So, do you see how A and D line up? They're both in position 1. So angle A and angle D are congruent. So you see how they both have a single arc? So those two are congruent. Do you see how B and E are in the middle position? So B and E are congruent. Do you see how they both have 3 U markings, I guess? So those are congruent. And then C and F are in the last position. They are congruent because they have those the 2 marks are the same there. So when you are writing that two triangles are congruent to each other, when you are writing that 2 triangles are congruent to each other, it has to be in a specific order. It has to match. The angles that are congruent need to match with each other with those corresponding angles. You can't just say triangle ABC is congruent to triangle FED. That's not true. You line up specifically the angles that match. Does that make sense? So from there, you can see that AB and DE are congruent. Where's AB? So that has 2, and that has 2. You can see that BC and EF are congruent. They both have a single marking. You can see that AC and DF are congruent. They both have the 3. All right, so do you see how you wouldn't even need to draw a picture to know exactly what parts are congruent based on the fact that how that's written? Do we have questions before we get into some examples? All right. So complete the congruent statement in each pair of congruent angles and sides. So notice the markings are already there. So triangle JKL is congruent to what triangle? So first of all, raise your hand and tell me which angle is congruent to angle J. Which angle is congruent to angle J? That's where we're going to start. Ian. T. So T needs to be the first letter of this one, right? So we have T, and we know angle J is congruent to angle T. Okay, which angle is congruent to angle K? Which angle is congruent to angle K, Kylie?
S.
They both have the 3, so it is S. So triangle TS so far, so angle K. Why is that even? So angle S and angle K are congruent. And then the last one. What's my last letter then? L matches with R. They both have this angle. So that would be angle R. So that's good so far. Questions so far? So Cameron, what side length is congruent to JK? So you can look in two different places. You can see JK and TS are the first two, right? Or you can say JK and TS both have a single marking. Okay, LJ. Gabe, what is LJ congruent to? Yeah, LJ are the outside two, so RT is what it should be. So RT and LJ both have 3 dashes. So RT is perfect. Lindsay, SR is congruent to?
KL.
Yeah, they're the last two and the last two. SR has 2 and KL has 2. All right. Complete each of the pair of congruent angles and sides given the congruent statement. So we're not even going to draw the triangle this time. Daniel, angle M is congruent to angle?
T.
Good, they're both in the first position. Jill, angle P is congruent to angle?
S.
Good, they're both in the last position. Carmichael, angle U is congruent to angle? They're both in the middle position. Emma, MN is congruent to? Good, MN are the first two, TU are the first two, so that makes sense. Hunter, PM is congruent to? So PM are the last two and S and T are the last two. Austin, SU is congruent to?
PN.
Good, those are the last two. So write a congruent statement based on the following information, meaning write which two triangles are congruent to each other. So Morgan, what would one of our triangles be? Let's start with just naming the first triangle. Triangle what? Good. Triangle MOQ. What is triangle MOQ congruent to, Cameron? Which angle does M match up with? So it starts with N, then what?
P.
Perfect. O and P, M and N. What does Q match up with? Q and E. So does that make sense based on what they have here? It says MQ and NE. Those are the outsides. MO and NP, first two. QO and EP. Does that match with all those statements there? Do you guys see how you can do that one? So really I look at the angles first and then I just check to make sure it works. Okay, complete the congruent statement and each pair of angles and sides. So, Greg, triangle ABC is congruent to what triangle?
CDA.
Okay, so triangle ABC, right?
Yeah.
So A has 2, so he needs to start with C in this one because it has 2. B and D do not have anything. And then C has 1, A has one in this triangle. So just because they're the same letter does not mean that they're going to be the same measurement in both triangles. Does that make sense? These are two different triangles that happen to share a side. So that's CDA. So notice here, this is a little bit different. With these angles, we have 3 letters versus the 1 letter we've been doing. Why are there 3 letters versus the 1 that we've been doing? Huh?
Because it's the same letters.
Because you can't, if you told me angle A, would I know which angle you're referring to here? No, there's 2 or, actually there's 3 angles there, right? There's 1, 2, and then the bigger angle. So when you guys do that, and it's not just like a single angle that's going on here, like D and B, you need the 3 letters. Which letter is the middle when you do an angle with 3 letters? Which letter should be in the middle? The vertex, okay? Okay, so let's get started here. AB is congruent to what, Hayden? CD. Very good. EQ, CB is congruent to AD. Good. Olivia, AC is congruent to CA or AC. They're the same side, right? That is known as the reflexive property. We will be using this a lot in proofs. If they share a side, it's called the reflexive property. Think about a reflection in the mirror. Do you see the same thing when you look in the mirror? Yeah, so they're sharing a side, so that's called the reflexive property. So if you say CA or AC, that is fine. Daniel, angle B is congruent to angle
D.
Good. Okay, we're going to need 3 letters for the rest of these, Desiree. So, CAB is this angle here. What is that one congruent to?
Is it ACD?
Perfect. 7. CAD is this angle here. Which one is that congruent to?
Angle AC.
Good. So we just need to prove that these 2 polygons are congruent. So if I start with polygon UVWX, what would that polygon be congruent to? Give me the polygon that would be congruent to. UVWX is congruent to polygon. Which one does U match up with? What does U match up with? M. What does V match up with? What does V match up with? A. W matches up with? What is W? T, and then X, right? Okay. Or should that be an H? It does. I was like, I think I didn't make this one, so probably yes, let's be honest. All right, so does this make sense? Does UV and MA, are they congruent? Are VW and AT congruent? Are WX and TH congruent? Are UX and MH congruent? So UX and MH. So are these 2 congruent? You would say because corresponding parts of congruent triangles are congruent. That's corresponding parts of congruent triangles are congruent. All right.